Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. This is episode 135, Jason. 135. Been at this now a little over 3 years. This is the first in our series where we're going to break down Veeam's 2023 ransomware trends research. And Jason, I want to pause right there. When we say it's our 2023 trends, we really mean industry-wide. This isn't just about Veeam customers, is it?
No, in fact, especially when we talk about some of the disappointing results that many organizations are having in their fights against ransomware, it's important to point out actually this is not Veeam customers. This is not a Veeam survey. So every year, Veeam runs several different research projects where we go out to independent research firms, different analyst houses, and we basically say, here's the kinds of questions and topics that we need answers for so that we can build better products as well as bring things to market more effectively. They go out, they find organizations, and frankly, especially in a topic like ransomware, that's important because frankly, a lot of folks don't want to raise their hand and say, hey, I got hit. Let me tell you how bad it was. Right. And so having that unbiased lens and being able for them to be in a safe space and say, yeah, this is how bad it was, and let's have other people not repeat those mistakes was a big deal. This particular research actually did find 1,200 organizations, all of whom had been hit by ransomware at least once in calendar 2022. And there's two kind of design goals that were really important for this project. One, in any organization of size, you're going to have a lot of different perspectives. And when you think about, there's probably more than four core stakeholders as part of prevention and remediation of a cyber event, but we picked four that we really wanted to hear from. And so the independent analyst firm went out and they found let's see, on 1,200, 21% of them were CISOs, so executive stakeholders responsible for remediation or survival, maybe is a better way to say that. 21% are backup admins. These are the people that we're used to actually talking with. Another 21% IT operations. They're the first ones to get the call, right? Hey, this looks a little funny, and why does my browser keep going to a gambling page? And then security professionals, right? This is an atypical audience for a backup company, and yet it makes sense for us to make sure we have all of these different perspectives to understand how bad was it, what happened during the attack, what were the lessons learned from that. The other design goal that came out of this research was, Dave, ransomware is an equal opportunity offender to organizations of all sizes. And so it's good to actually survey organizations of all sizes to understand, again, how frequently, how bad, and what are you doing about it now?
Yeah, it is a crime of opportunity largely. I say largely because there certainly are targeted attacks, state-sponsored attacks, but
Sure.
by and large, someone's just blasting out quite literally hundreds of thousands of phishing emails or just scanning open IP ports and ranges. So if we actually double click on this, with that as the setup, we're going to continually say, I think, on every slide we share, and wait, it's worse. So if we now think about what actually happens is close to half of your production data, meaning, your primary. We haven't gotten to backups yet, but 45% on average of your production data is going to get attacked. But that's the average. There are boundary conditions here too, aren't there?
Oh gosh, yeah, it kind of breaks my heart a little bit. Let's take a look at the worst case scenario. So take a look in this dark red wedge, and I kind of feel like I'm a weather reporter for a second over here in the Northwest. So that red wedge in the upper left hand corner for 14% of organizations. So I know there's a lot of percentage size on this chart. So let's say it this way: in 1 in 7 organizations, they lost nearly everything. Right. So
Yeah.
this is like if you've ever driven through a town that had a tornado come through, and where you used to have a house, you now have a cement slab and a couple pieces of wood studs poking out of it. And that's all that's left. Right. All the insides are gone. All the rest of the framing is gone. It is down to the slab and the studs. And that's what that dark red wedge looks like, is 80% or more of the data it was gone in 1 in 7 organizations. And that to me is startling. In fact, if you add up the folks that lost more than half of their data, now we're up to 33%. 1 in 3 organizations lost more than half of their production data along the way. So maybe it wasn't just down to slab and studs, but the roof's gone, and so is the second floor. So,
What I think is really interesting on here too is when you see the poor personas over on kind of the lower left-hand side, those that are furthest removed, meaning the chief information security officer, believe that they're going to lose the least amount of data of the four personas. The person actually in charge of doing the recovery, meaning the backup administrator, is the most either pessimistic or realistic about what they can actually plan on getting back and what's going to be affected. And by affected, we mean it's either deleted or encrypted. It is majorly compromised or unavailable in any way, shape, or form.
yeah, I think for this one, I think I would probably trust the folks that are actually restoring data to figure out how much data needed to be restored. That's just a guess.
Exact,
But
exactly.
now, interestingly enough, the security professionals are only 1% behind them, right? And so,
Yeah.
Dave, to your point, it does kind of look like this is one of those scenarios where perhaps executives might be, and I don't want to be insulting with the term, but a little bit naive to exactly how bad some of these attacks can be. But the fact that the security professionals who are the ones that are going to be triaging, is this corrupted or affected data or not? And the folks that are then going to be restoring that data, they're within 1% of each other of agreeing nearly half. Nearly half. So again, I just keep going back to the roof and the second floor are just gone, and anything that you had inside of it, and that's hopefully a mental image that none of us actually want to face in real life.
Yeah, and we should point out if you've seen some of our other industry insights around some of the trends and research we've done, this is per incident. And
Right.
what we saw in a different research report, again, industry wide, not being customers, was that 49% or essentially half responded that they got hit 2 or 3 times in the last year. So, Jason, let's just take averages. Even though we've pointed out there's some pretty severe boundary conditions. If on average you're going to lose 45% of your data, and half of the people on average are going to get hit 2 or 3 times a year, this means every few months you're in this cycle of trying to respond to massive data loss at a time that your chief information security officer thinks that they're more recoverable than they are. And if we had a CEO or a board level survey in here, I'm willing to bet that that percentage would be also equally more optimistic than those that are tasked with actually operationally handling things.
I think it's a really good read, Dave. And again, I just keep, and I know when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So to me, I'm a DR guy, and so I think about this the same way. I think about ransomware at scale the same way I think about fire and flood and hurricanes and tornadoes, and that is, really massive data disruption and service disruption at scale. Of course, the difference is, as you mentioned, ransomware is really much more of a when than an if, right? But even if you're talking about the if and you're rolling the dice, right? So we said 1 in 7 here lose almost everything. Well, tornadoes strike. I'm in the U.S. Tornadoes strike the Midwest every every winter. I mean, every summer, right? Hurricanes every late spring. In the Northeast, winter every year. I mean, so the idea of an annual type of event and hey, did we miss it this year kind of thing is already something of an if not a when. Now we're talking about multiple bad weather seasons per year based on those bad actors. It's just a really scary time when you realize this is the potential result. You have a 1 in 7 chance of losing almost everything, and you get 2 or 3 swings at bat. I mean, that's just scary.
Yeah, it's pretty concerning. And, should have pointed out earlier, a couple ways you can download this. You can check out the QR code that Jason's put in the upper right-hand corner. Or if you're speaking of ransomware and cyber, if you're a little wary of QR codes, feel free
Yep.
to type in the short URL link in there, which is simply just VEE 2es.am/RW23. Just means ransomware 2023. So you can go to VEE.am/RW23, download the full report. I'm a broken record, but Jason, I always like to say when it comes to this research, you owe it to yourself to get educated, particularly in this case, because The statistics are quite sobering. Again, 1,200 organizations that got hit with ransomware. This is industry wide. Veeam customers represent less than 7% of the sample size. This is all across the world in terms of geographies.
Yep.
We showed that it's all different kinds of industry verticals as well as company sizes. So we've done everything we can to make this as representative of the overall industry as we can. But some of these slides might be useful to have a conversation with either your data center team or taking it all the way up to a board level discussion about why we need to go and invest in now improving our hand, improving our response. We're investing in prevention, but we also need to invest in protection. And
Yeah.
maybe that tees up, our next data point, speaking of protection.
It does. It's also worth, by the way, bringing up the fact that, we talk about this as industry specific data or industry wide data along the way. Friendly reminder. So Dave and I have both been at Veeam for a little over 5.5 years each along that curve, but both of us came from the analyst world. This is what we used to do in order to help organizations and in customers make better choices and have hopefully more meaningful conversations around this. Dave, I wouldn't write this question any other way. No matter what backup company I was with, no matter what research firm I was supporting, the question really is just that straightforward. How bad was it, right? Now, the next question that comes right after that is, now that you know how bad it was, how well could you recover from that? So again, if you have in the back of your mind 45% of your data on average gets hit on average, right? Then the next question was, what percentage of that affected data were you actually able to recover? And unfortunately, the punchline is 2/3. Now, 2/3 of 45% affected basically means, back in the napkin math, on average, you should expect to lose about 15%, one in six of whatever you hold dear, as unrecoverable data. But before we really fixate on that, Dave, there are some organizations, unfortunately, in the darker red, they couldn't hardly get anything back at all.
Yeah, this is, really illustrating the point that cyber threats, a successful cyber attack, a whole series of things had to fail. And now when someone gets to the recovery scenario, they're actually finding out in this 7% really quickly out of 1,200. That's 84 organizations that could only get back 1/5 or less of their data. Stated another way, they lost 4 out of 5 applications or servers or files shares or more, compared to the 100% of the organization, what they had thought they were going to be recovering. So they got hit on production because so many things failed from a security and intrusion protection standpoint. And then when they went to go restore, on average, they're only getting 2/3 back. But if you look at the boundary conditions, it's even worse. This is just systemic failure after systemic failure, isn't it?
It is. And over the next several weeks, we're going to explore a few more elements in that. I mean, there's lots of dominoes that have to fall, right? So, first they had to be able to get in, then they had to be able to find credentials, then they had to actually have to connect to servers, then they had to be able to spread their payload without detection. I mean, there's lots of things that go wrong right up until this point. And then when you start playing that backwards again, you can see, okay, now I understand why did we get hit as bad as we did. And as you mentioned, for 22% of organizations, they were able to get back very little along that way. But even when you just look at the overall average, the average is you're only getting back barely half of what was affected. And oh, by the way, almost half was affected. And remember, you're going to get that multiple times. But wait, the news gets worse, right? So we talked about you're going to get hit a couple times per year. We talked about the catastrophe of the data loss along the way. Let's take a look at one more stat to finish framing the conversation. And that is, organizations were also asked from the entire remediation process before the organization considered the event to be over, air quotes, right? How long did that take? And the average was 3.5 weeks, right? The average amount of time before someone said, now again, Dave, take a look at all the bloody red on that left-hand side. For many organizations, this was well into the months that it took them before they really felt like it was an over.
Yeah, 46% saying it took half a month to a month to multiple months. And if I look at the multiple months, 21% said it took 1 to 4 months. And we've already
Ugh.
asserted that a lot of people are going to get hit multiple times per year. This literally means you are in hardcore react mode every quarter, at least for some. And in some cases, it really starts to hit the business in terms of is the organization going to be viable if they're going to lose 18% or more on average of data every single incident, and they're going to be faced with multiple incidents per year. This is really why we encourage people to take this research and have a proactive conversation with the business, test your systems, make sure you harden your systems. We'll be detailing in future episodes some practical advice, some best practices, regardless of what backup product you're using. But as an industry, Jason, we are currently losing the war on cyber threats and ransomware.
Yeah. So, and let's just make this just a little bit more depressing before we wrap up. And as Dave mentioned, this is the first in a several week installment series. The first step in solving anything is to understand the scope of the problem. Right. And that's what we're doing this week. And we have a few more weeks of more bad news coming in different aspects of the process to really wholly understand the problem. And again, that's why Veeam publishes all of this research, is to understand as an industry what's the problem that needs to be solved, so that we, and frankly, even some of our competitors, at least the nice ones, can learn how to build better products so that we can all address the issue overall. But there is one more little caveat in this one that I think is worth pointing out. And again, I'm a DR guy, right? So let me just draw your eye to this. When I said before that I think about ransomware the same way I think about other kinds of natural disasters at scale, fire and flood being good examples. Well, if you have a data center that caught fire, two things. One, you know which servers were affected. They're the ones that are brown and crispy, right? And the data that was being replicated or backed up, that last known copy of the data, that was good data right before the fire hit. So light it up, get going, get back to business. That's what BCDR is all about. Same thing with flood, right? You know the servers that need to be affected. They're the ones with water dripping out of the back of the chassis. Data's good data. Light it up, get going. The problem that we have in ransomware is that you don't know what the good data is.
Right.
Right? It's not crispy. It's not drippy. And so before you can even start the clock on how quickly you need to recover, you first have to figure out which ones are drippy and crispy, right? You have to figure out which ones are infected. So there's a triage there that takes time. And that triage can take effect first on the production servers, where you're saying, hey, do I think this has bad data in it? Alternatively, during the recovery stream, we're going to talk about this later in the series, the idea of, hey, this last backup is equally infected. Hey, that last snapshot, equally affected. And so you have to ratchet backwards as part of that recovery stream. So as you start thinking about that, 3.4 weeks as the average is the average best case. Because just that triage clock hasn't even kicked in yet for some of those. So just be mindful of the fact that this is going to be worse than you think. It's not going to end as well as you hope, and it's going to take longer than you want, right? And that's the problem statement that we're dealing with, and hopefully that sets up the series that we're going to do. If you don't want to wait for the rest of the series, again, here's that QR code so that you can download the report. If you don't trust the QR code, there's the URL on the bottom of the screen that Dave was mentioning earlier, VEE.am/RW23. And by the way, if you have questions about how the research was conducted, some of the additional insights that might not have made the report, et cetera, whatever else, you can reach Dave, me, and our other colleague, Julie Webb, via the strategic research at Veeam.com. Dave, anything else you want to add for today?
The only thing that, just building on what you said about how this is more difficult than most people realize, you may well still be under attack at the moment that you're actually aware that you have a problem, trying to recover, and unfortunately those averages look poor. But it reminds me, about 3-ish weeks ago, I was in Tempe, Arizona, and we had a major reseller of not just Veeam, but of multiple other solutions providers and backup and recovery as well. And the three gentlemen that came out and had a discussion, all day long discussion back and forth on cyber, said, the number one thing we've learned and remember about an incident is the smell. No one's gone home. There's food in the corner. We've been there for weeks. They were adamant, and I thought it was interesting.
Wow.
It was actually just before we got this research back and published it, because we only published it 2 weeks ago now. And their whole thing was they start out the day like, as an industry, can we just stop this nonsense about recovery is going to be an hour or two? Because it's not. And it doesn't matter the vendor, doesn't matter, your company, it's going to be bad. So let's stop, acting like everything's going to be perfect, because it's not. And by the way, it's going to be so not perfect that you will remember that incident, that smell, that time away from your family, the things that you've missed, the people calling you on the cell phone or doing text messages because maybe your team's systems and other communications are compromised, is going to be something that you're never going to forget until it happens again. I mean, those were
Wow.
pretty sobering words from a group that's been through hundreds and hundreds of these activities now.
You know, unfortunately, you don't forget the smell. And while I have not had that experience yet, I cut my teeth early in my career with IBM BCRS, and you'd go to these large what you thought was just a non-labeled warehouse, and you go inside and there are teams putting in racks of servers to get ready for your taper stores, and there are rows of cubicles with PCs, and at the end of every row was the fax machine and the coffee maker, and that's what you were going to bring your team into when you'd had a catastrophic event over time. And you're right, there is a staleness there, not to mention really bad coffee. Why does no one temporarily know how to make good coffee? But that should be a key role in any BCDR plan too. But you're right, the stale and the mustiness of spinning up that old gear to get back up and running again. I had forgotten that. That is okay.
Well, with that, we'll wrap up this episode. Again, just encourage everyone to get the research, start improving your hand. I always like to say you can't do everything, but you can do something. Literally anything you do to try to minimize your exposure, your attack surface, and improve your recoverability is going to benefit you, and benefit you probably multiple times over going forward. So until then, stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the next live stream.
Take care.